The street is quiet in that way only midnight understands. No engines, no music, just the soft hum of distant power lines and a dog somewhere counting the seconds with low barks. A pale moon hangs over the town like a white lantern, so close it looks touchable. On the roof of a one-story house, a teenage girl named Kindness kneels with both hands pressed to the concrete, as if steadying the earth. She's in an oversized hoodie, hair tied back, eyes swollen from the kind of tears you cry quietly so you don't wake anyone. Beside her is a small backpack, a pen, a lined notebook, a bottle of water, and a folded sweater. No charms. No superstitions. Just the tools of someone who intends to understand. She looks up. Her voice is soft but steady. If you really keep secrets like they say, don't keep mine. Please. Show me the truth. For a full 10 seconds, nothing moves. Then the neighborhood changes, like the world takes a long breath and holds it. The night insects stop. A faraway generator dies. Even the air feels paused. A thin ribbon of light peels off the moon and threads the sky, faint as a spider's line, falling gently until it rests across the rooftops like a path that only she can see. The light reaches the edge of the roof and stops at her bare toes. And then a voice, clear, calm, not loud yet impossible to ignore, speaks exactly one word from everywhere and nowhere at once. Kindness. This is a true story the way towns tell truths, names softened, edges sanded, but the night was real, the moon was bright, and the choice she made before dawn changed everything. Welcome to Tales by Lymarh. Please like, share and subscribe. In our town, people know each other by footsteps. You can tell who's approaching by the rhythm, the brisk clack-clack of Mrs. Cole in her church heels, the lazy shuffling of Mr. James with his radio tucked under his arm. Kindness is different, she walks like she's listening, like every sound is a clue. She lives with her mother, Grace, in a small house where the windows are always clean and the kitchen smells faintly of soap and cinnamon. Grace is a tailor with steady fingers and unstitchable hope. She doesn't talk much about the past. When neighbors ask about Kindness's father, Grace smiles politely and changes the subject to hem lengths and fabric colors. It isn't a lie. It's a detour. Kindness learned early that detours can take years. At school, she's the quiet top of her class, the one who raises a hand only when it matters. She's good at physics not because numbers adore her but because numbers don't gossip. They say what they are and stand by it. Her favorite teacher, Ms. Parker, once told her, questions are the bravest part of learning, and then slipped her a second-hand astronomy book with a moon sticker on the cover. Kindness read it twice and underlined the parts that felt like instructions: observe, record, test, repeat. At home, she keeps a notebook hidden between textbooks. On the first page, she wrote a title in neat, careful letters: Things I Will Ask the Moon. Underneath, a list. 1. Where did he go? 2. Did I do something wrong? 3. Why does silence feel heavier at night? 4. If I know the truth, will it hurt less? Or more? No one knows about the list. Not her best friend Daniel, who lives 2 houses away and brings her plant cuttings in jelly cups. Not Aunt Ruth, the neighbor who sells fruit and advice in the same tone. Not even Grace, who hears everything except the questions her daughter hides behind a steady face. On market days, Kindness helps Grace carry fabric and smiles through the soft interrogation of customers. How tall you've grown. Are you applying to university? You're the picture of your mother. Somewhere between compliments, Aunt Ruth squeezes in the town's most popular whisper. They say if you ask the moon a hard question on a bright night, it answers. But people don't come back the same. She lowers her voice. You've heard about Aaron, the baker's son? Stared at the moon all night, woke up gentle as a lamb but would never touch the oven again. Kindness nods politely, the way you nod at thunder you can't control. That night she adds a 5th line to her list. 5. What if answers change who I am? She isn't reckless. She is methodical. She notices the moon has its moods. Fat and soft one week, thin and sharp another. She tracks the phases on her phone, scribbles them into the notebook, compares them with how people behave, how her mother sleeps. She starts to suspect the town runs on tides nobody names. Then one afternoon, Ms. Parker surprises the class with a lesson on folklore and science. Some stories protect us before we learn the math, she says. The question isn't whether the moon talks. The question is, what are we prepared to hear when the night gets quiet enough? All day, kindness feels like the words are following her home. That evening, Grace works late on a wedding dress, pins in her mouth, measuring tape around her neck like a ribbon. Kindness makes tea and perches on the table edge. Mom, she begins carefully, if someone really wanted to know something important, would you want them to ask? Grace pauses. The air shifts. She takes the pins out slowly. Important things don't mind being asked, she says, eyes fixed on the dress. It's people who fear the answers. Kindness looks at the notebook in her bag. She doesn't bring it out. Some nights are not for paper. Close to midnight, the power blinks and returns. Daniel texts, "Come see the moon. It's weird tonight." She steps outside. The moon is brighter than streetlights, bright enough to pick out nails in fences, bright enough to make shadows crisp. Across the rooftops, people notice and forget to pretend they don't. Kindness stands in the yard. She doesn't know whether the moon will answer. She only knows the question has grown too big for walls. She zips the backpack, slides the notebook inside, and writes one more line on the list in a hurry, as if speed can protect her from doubt. 6. If I ask gently, will the night be kind? She doesn't tell anyone where she's going. She doesn't take talismans or superstitions. She takes water, a sweater, and every brave cell in her body. Then she climbs the ladder to the roof, breathes in the clean cold of a bright night, and kneels. The town holds its breath. And the moon, patient and enormous, begins to listen. The first thing that disappears is the small noise of everything. Even the dog that narrates the street at midnight gives up. Kindness feels it, like a hand lowering the volume knob on the world. Then the light ropes down from the moon. It isn't dramatic. It's precise, a thin path a shade paler than the rooftop, bright enough to suggest direction, not force it. It stretches like a beam carefully laying itself between houses, over a fence, toward the scrubby hill behind the estate where cell service is temperamental and rumors have better reception. Kindness. Hearing your name spoken by a voice that isn't a person but also isn't wind is like remembering something you never learned. She doesn't jump. She steadies her breathing. She has trained for this, nights of stillness, the discipline of questions. She answers the air. I'm here. The next words feel placed directly into her chest. Truth is heavy. Are your hands free? She looks down at them. No rings. No charms. Only skin and the faint calluses of someone who turns pages more than she turns soil. They are, she says. Then walk. Kindness climbs down the ladder, slips through the gate, and follows the pale thread of light. She moves past the sleeping houses, past Daniel's window, a glow under the curtain, a whisper of music. He always falls asleep to piano. She wants to knock. She doesn't. Not because she is alone, but because not all journeys allow companions at the start. At the end of the street, the light drops over the gutter and climbs the back path to the hill. Plants lean in. Gravel makes small crunches that feel louder than they are. The night has that crisp temperature where your breath turns thoughtful in front of you. At the base of the hill, the path brightens into something not quite ground and not quite beam. She tests it with the toe of her shoe. It holds. She steps on. A quiet instruction settles into her bones. No turning back once you choose forward. She thinks of the list in her bag. Observe, record, test, repeat. She nods to no one she can see and walks. The hill isn't steep, but the moment she reaches the top, the world reorganizes. It's not that she's in a different place. It's that the place is suddenly in high definition. She can hear the thin thread of a stream she didn't know existed, the whisper of tall grass naming the direction of the breeze, the low thud of her own careful heart. And under it, like a bass line only the brave get to hear, a hum that could be the sky's pulse. The voice returns, gentler now. You asked for the truth about what was taken. To find it, bring me the stolen light before the rooster announces morning. Her throat tightens. What is stolen light? You will know it when your fear tries to rename it. Follow the path that looks like a choice. She almost smiles. The moon talks like teachers who trust you to be clever. Why me? She asks, surprising herself. She planned clever questions, only honest ones come. Because you didn't come to bargain. You came to listen. The path spills forward into the scrub, soft at the edges like something that respects darkness. Kindness pulls her sweater on, tucks her hair behind her ears, and keeps moving. If she expected forests to announce themselves with drama, howls, glowing eyes, branches twisting in deliberate shapes, she learns now that real thresholds are quieter. There isn't a gate. There is a thinning of ordinary. The trees ahead are only trees until you notice the smallest leaves face the wrong way, sunward in the dead of night. The soil smells faintly of rain though it hasn't rained. A moth guides her for a few seconds, then vanishes like a kind thought in a crowded day. She walks. Time rearranges itself the way it does in waiting rooms and conversations that matter. She passes a rock that looks like a sleeping cat, a shrub bent exactly like a question mark, a patch of ground that makes no sound underfoot. She begins to understand the instruction: follow the path that looks like a choice. The obvious track is straight and clear. The tempting one curves slightly toward a darker cluster of trees where the air feels cooler and her curiosity warms. She chooses the curve. The ground slopes, then levels. The hum of the world grows a notch louder. And then she hears it, water moving with purpose. Not loud. Present. The path opens into a bank of smooth stones. A river she's never seen in daylight cuts the land in a patient line. It isn't wide, but it's deeper than its modest voice suggests. Moonlight lays itself across the surface and the water returns it with quiet pride. Kindness stops. This is the first place she has felt watched by something not unkind. The notebook in her bag presses against her spine as if reminding her to write. She kneels, dips fingers into the water. Cold. Clean. When she looks up, the river has changed in exactly one way. The ripples have gathered into a shape, not quite a mouth, not quite a mask. She doesn't flinch. She breathes. The voice that rises isn't the same as the moon's. It's more grounded, as if produced by stones speaking through water. To cross, it says, you must tell the truth that scares you most. She has practiced telling truths. She has not practiced telling this one out loud. She considers saying something acceptable: I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of failing exams. True in small ways, but not the truth. The river waits, not impatient, not encouraging. Just there. Like a deadline that isn't cruel but isn't moving. She closes her eyes and thinks of Grace's careful hands, Daniel's unearned belief in her, Miss Parker's gift of a book, Aunt Ruth's warnings wrapped in jokes. She thinks of the man in all her almost memories, her father in a doorway, her father laughing in a kitchen, with details she can't be sure aren't borrowed from other people's stories. She thinks of the list. She thinks of the night the police car idled on their street and no one went outside. She thinks of birthdays counted in maybe next year. When she speaks, the words come out simple. I'm afraid of being the only one left who remembers what I'm looking for. The river doesn't move. She adds, quieter. And I'm afraid that when I find it, it will ask me to choose between the truth and someone I love. The water stills as if considering a student who finally stopped reciting and started answering. Then it ripples once, decisively, and the current shifts. The surface flattens into a narrow, luminous bridge. Not dry, not wet, a surface that feels like walking on the back of a large calm animal. She steps onto it. The first footfall feels like permission. Halfway across, the river speaks again, not to test, but to mentor. Remember this, child of careful questions, fear is a signpost, not a wall. If you run from it, you go in circles. If you face it, you cross. On the far bank, she turns back out of instinct and gratitude. The water has returned to its unassuming conversation with the night. She feels lighter the way you feel after naming something correctly. She opens the notebook and writes. Truth that scares me, being the last witness. Possible price, choosing truth over comfort. Crossed because fear isn't a wall. Her handwriting is steadier than her heartbeat. She caps the pen and looks up. The path that looks like a choice appears again, 2 openings between trees, one wide, full of pale grass that whispers safe, safe. One narrow, dark as a closed eye but carrying, if you pay attention, a faint scent of smoke and citrus like the memory of a kitchen at breakfast. She feels her body lean toward the memory. She chooses the narrow opening. The night folds in, not menacing, just close. Somewhere a branch clicks like a polite tongue. She walks slower now, senses on their toes. Twice she thinks she hears her name spoken softly, the way friends do when they don't want to wake a house. Twice she ignores it, because she knows Daniel is asleep and the moon has a different voice. From time to time, she reaches back to touch the notebook as if it's a hand. Not because she thinks paper will save her, but because record-keeping is the opposite of being lost. The ground rises, dips, rises again. She steps into a clearing so round it seems designed. The grass is shorter here. The air is a fraction warmer. In the exact center, a single stone stands. A gentle pillar the height of her waist, smooth on one side, scratched on the other. She approaches. The scratches aren't random. They're names. Some she recognizes, Aaron, the baker's son, Mara, who moved to the city the same year the rain refused to stop, Cole, could be anyone, our town has many. Some names are missing letters, as if the stone brewed them and the weather sipped. At the bottom of the stone, fresh and clear, is a sentence that wasn't there until her eyes reached it. Bring back what was taken. Underneath, lighter, almost a reflex. And don't confuse stolen light with borrowed comfort. She traces the letters with 2 fingers, the way you touch directions when you're almost sure but not entirely. A small wind crosses the clearing and tastes like the first minute after a long cry, the kind of air that belongs to decisions. Somewhere beyond the trees, a rooster checks its watch in its sleep. The night has moved. Dawn is a rumor. Kindness closes her eyes and breathes through her nose, slow. She thinks of the list. She thinks of the first answer she has already earned. She thinks of Grace asleep on the couch. That feels like walking on the back of a large calm animal. She steps onto it. The first footfall feels like permission. Halfway across, the river speaks again, not to test, but to mentor. Remember this, child of careful questions, fear is a signpost, not a wall. If you run from it, you go in circles. If you face it, you cross. On the far bank, she turns back out of instinct and gratitude. The water has returned to its unassuming conversation with the night. She feels lighter the way you feel after naming something correctly. She opens the notebook and writes. Truth that scares me, being the last witness. Possible price, choosing truth over comfort. Crossed because fear isn't a wall. Her handwriting is steadier than her heartbeat. She caps the pen and looks up. The path that looks like a choice appears again, 2 openings between trees, one wide, full of pale grass that whispers safe, safe. One narrow, dark as a closed eye but carrying, if you pay attention, a faint scent of smoke and citrus like the memory of a kitchen at breakfast. She feels her body lean toward the memory. She chooses the narrow opening. The night folds in, not menacing, just close. Somewhere a branch clicks like a polite tongue. She walks slower now, senses on their toes. Twice she thinks she hears her name spoken softly, the way friends do when they don't want to wake a house. Twice she ignores it, because she knows Daniel is asleep and the moon has a different voice. From time to time, she reaches back to touch the notebook as if it's a hand. Not because she thinks paper will save her, but because record-keeping is the opposite of being lost. The ground rises, dips, rises again. She steps into a clearing so round it seems designed. The grass is shorter here. The air is a fraction warmer. In the exact center, a single stone stands. A gentle pillar the height of her waist, smooth on one side, scratched on the other. She approaches. The scratches aren't random. They're names. Some she recognizes: Aaron, the baker's son; Mara, who moved to the city the same year the rain refused to stop; Cole, could be anyone, our town has many. Some names are missing letters, as if the stone brewed them and the weather sipped. At the bottom of the stone, fresh and clear, is a sentence that wasn't there until her eyes reached it. Bring back what was taken. Underneath, lighter, almost a reflex. And don't confuse stolen light with borrowed comfort. She traces the letters with 2 fingers, the way you touch directions when you're almost sure but not entirely. A small wind crosses the clearing and tastes like the first minute after a long cry, the kind of air that belongs to decisions. Somewhere beyond the trees, a rooster checks its watch in its sleep. The night has moved. Dawn is a rumor. Kindness closes her eyes and breathes through her nose, slow. She thinks of the list. She thinks of the first answer she has already earned. She thinks of Grace asleep on the couch. Needle and thread in a tidy dish. She thinks, impossibly, that she can do this. When she opens her eyes, the clearing is different in a way you only notice if you were paying the kind of attention the world rarely asks for. There are footprints. One set. Bare. Small. Facing the direction of a shadowed archway on the far side, 2 trees leaning into each other like old friends making a tunnel of their shoulders. She caps her pen, pockets the notebook, and heads toward the archway. She walks like someone who understands that the next part matters even more than the bravery that got her here. The forest after the clearing rearranges itself into a lesson. Not a cruel one, just patient. The path narrows the way conversations do when it's time to stop avoiding the point. Kindness follows the footprints until they fade into ground that remembers poorly. When the prints end, the air picks up the job of guiding, a soft, rhythmic hush that might be leaves but feels like syllables. She listens. Words don't form, but intent does. Forward. The trees here hold old sunlight in their bark, thin threads of warmth trapped like stories handed down. When she brushes past, she feels small pockets of day kiss her sleeves. It keeps her from thinking too long about the rooster and the sky that is fractionally less black than before. Then, unexpectedly, the sound of water again. Not the first river's steady, adult voice. This one is lighter, darting, like a child telling a secret fast. She steps into another opening and finds a stream stitched with pebbles that wink up at the moon. It's shallow enough to cross in 3 steps. She kneels on the bank. Hello, she says, remembering that politeness doesn't cost energy here, it gives it. The stream answers in a voice that is a cousin to laughter. We know you. You crossed an older tongue. I did. What did you tell it? She considers lying by omission. I told it something true, but the night notices shortcuts. I told it I'm afraid of being the last witness, she says. And of choosing truth over someone I love. The stream bubbles approval. Then take this with you, the thing you fear losing is not love. It is the version of yourself that never changed. Keep love, let her grow. She smiles before she can stop herself. Thank you. Go on, the stream urges. We are the small test. The larger one waits where voices carry. She crosses in 3 quick steps, the water kissing her ankles cold, and keeps moving. The trees thin into a grove that feels like a room, space arranged by intention rather than accident. She recognizes the sensation from classrooms just before a test is placed face down on every desk. The first voice comes from behind her left shoulder. Kindness. It sounds like Daniel, freshly awake, half laughing. Wait. Don't go alone. She doesn't turn. The moon warned her in a way that wasn't a warning. Follow the path that looks like a choice. Turning would look like a choice. It would not be one. The center is no treasure chest, no glowing orb. There is a lantern, cracked on one side, unlit, sitting on a flat stone. Everything in her pauses. You would miss it in daylight. You would call it junk. But something in her knows, this is it. Stolen light is not always an object. Sometimes it's a promise someone took away and forgot to return. She kneels. The lantern is cool, the metal dented in a familiar way, familiar not because she has held this lantern before, but because she has held the feeling of it, a father's unfinished goodbye, a mother's careful detour, a night's hint that answers aren't always dramatic. She lifts it. It is heavier than it looks. A voice, not the moon, not the river, not the shape, leans close from memory. I meant to come back, it says, and the sentence holds the ache of 100 quiet houses. I meant to explain. Her eyes sting. She places the lantern against her chest and stands. The hollow releases a breath. Behind her, the not person says with the politeness of a losing salesman, you can still choose the softer version. We'll edit the cracks. We'll give you an ending where nothing weighs anything. She doesn't turn. Cracks let light out, she says, and is startled by the truth of it as it leaves her mouth. She begins to walk back the way she came, lantern in both hands. It is unlit, but it changes the night, not by shining, but by asking every other light to be honest in its presence. At the grove's edge, the first voices try again, smaller now, less sure. Kindness? Daniel's echo is a friendly question mark. Baby, Grace's echo says, softer than the real Grace ever lets herself be in case softness is misread as weakness. Kindness answers them under her breath as if tucking words into their pockets for later. I'm okay. I'm coming home. But I won't come home the easy way. When she reaches the little stream, it laughs like a cousin who knew she would pass and says, mind your step. She crosses in 3 again, the middle one longer to keep balance with the weight. At the first river, the surface rises obediently to meet her feet, and the voice says, approving. Now you know, the truth you carry is also the bridge. On the far bank, the path opens toward the hill where the town will reappear in the same place it has always been, and not the same at all. Somewhere behind the houses, a rooster clears its throat. The sky, if you squint, is something less than black. She quickens her pace without hurrying, because she has learned what the night wanted her to learn. Rushing is a kind of fear, and fear is a signpost, not a wall. She climbs the hill. She is almost to the top when the moon speaks one last time before morning, quiet enough that it feels like a secret between friends. You did not come to bargain. You came to listen. Now, be listened to. Kindness steps onto the hill's crown. The town lies below, asleep and waiting to understand itself by daylight. She holds the cracked lantern and understands, finally, what was taken and what it means to return it. The rooster inhales. The horizon thinks about mercy. The hollow closed behind her like a page folding shut. The cracked lantern in Kindness's arms was heavier than it looked, as if every untold story in the town had been sealed inside it. Her shoes found the familiar path again, though nothing about it felt familiar anymore. The trees leaned in like old witnesses who had waited years just to see someone carry this burden. Each step sent a quiet vibration into the earth, as if the ground itself recognized what she was holding. The rooster crowed. Kindness froze. Dawn wasn't waiting anymore, it was arriving. A smear of gray split the horizon, bleeding into pale blue. She tightened her grip on the lantern and whispered to herself. Don't run. Running is fear. And fear is not a wall. Still, her pace quickened. Not a sprint, not a stumble, but a determined stride. She passed the little stream. Its laughter softer now, almost respectful. She passed the great river, its bridge rising again, gentler this time, as if it knew she had earned its trust. By the time she reached the scrubby hill behind the estate, the sky was growing pale. The moon hovered low, swollen and tired, watching her return like a parent too proud to speak. Kindness climbed the hilltop. From there, the town looked ordinary again, roofs in rows, narrow streets, faint smoke from early fires. Yet she knew nothing about it was ordinary anymore. The lantern pulsed once in her hands, a soft throb of light escaping through the crack, too weak to shine far, but strong enough to remind her this wasn't over. The moon's voice came for the last time that night, hushed and intimate. Truth carried home changes the house it enters. Be gentle, but be firm. And then the moon dimmed, slipping into daylight's shadow. Kindness stood alone on the hilltop. It was morning. And she was going home. Her house looked exactly as she left it. The peeling blue door, the small garden her mother kept alive with devotion and stubbornness, the curtain drawn in the living room. But the silence inside felt different. Grace was on the couch, still in her sewing dress, a blanket falling off her shoulders, head bent from exhaustion. The sewing machine sat on the table like a faithful dog waiting for its master to wake. Kindness stepped in quietly. The floorboards creaked. Grace stirred but did not wake. For a moment, Kindness thought of hiding the lantern. Pretending she had never left. Pretending the night had been only a dream. But the crack in the lantern glowed faintly, and with it came a whisper, not the moon's, not the river's, not the trickster's, but something achingly familiar. I meant to come back. Kindness almost dropped it. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was her father's. She fell to her knees, clutching the lantern. More words seeped through the crack, faint and broken, as though carried across impossible distance. I didn't leave you. I was taken. Her vision blurred with tears. All these years, she had imagined betrayal, abandonment, silence. But this was different. Her father had not walked away. He had been stolen, just like the lantern's light. She pressed the lantern to her chest, trembling. At that moment, Grace stirred awake. Her tired eyes blinked open and landed on her daughter, and the lantern glowing faintly in her arms. The color drained from Grace's face. Her lips parted, her voice dry as ash. Kindness, where did you get that? The question cracked the air like lightning. Kindness wanted to lie. She wanted to protect her mother from the truth she carried. But she remembered the river's lesson: fear is a signpost, not a wall. So she told her. Every step, every test, every voice in the night. She told her about the moon, the bargain, the river, the grove, the not person, the hollow. And finally, about the lantern, and the voice inside it that belonged to the man they both had lost. Grace listened without moving, without blinking. When Kindness finished, the room was silent except for the faint pulse of the lantern's glow. Finally, Grace whispered. I prayed you would never go looking. Because I knew, if you did, you would find what I've been running from." Her voice cracked, and with it, years of silence cracked too. "He didn't leave us, kindness. He was taken by a debt older than love. I tried to shield you from it. But the moon doesn't forget." Tears slid down Grace's face. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the lantern. For the first time in years, her shoulders shook with the weight she had carried alone. And kindness, kneeling on the floor, finally understood, truth was not just for her. Truth was for both of them. The lantern grew heavier by the hour. At first, kindness thought it was her arms aching. But she realized it wasn't physical, it was the burden of truth itself, pressing down on her. When she tried to set it down, it pulsed brighter, forcing her to acknowledge it. When she tried to cover it, the cracks spilled light across the walls, demanding to be seen. Grace avoided it. She went about her day as though it didn't exist, but her eyes betrayed her. Every glance was a mixture of love, fear, and guilt. By evening, kindness couldn't bear it. She carried the lantern to the backyard, sat in the garden her mother tended, and whispered into the crack. "What do you want from me?" The answer came softly, her father's voice threaded with sorrow. "Not what I want. What the truth wants. To be spoken." The words pierced her. She realized the lantern wasn't just a vessel, it was a demand. Her father's spirit, his disappearance, the debt, the silence. All of it was truth begging to be released. But releasing it would come with a price. Because once spoken, the truth could never be taken back. It would change Grace. It would change kindness. It would change the town. That night, kindness dreamed of shadows gathering around her bed, whispering temptations. Keep it hidden. Protect them. Let the lie live, it is softer. She woke up sweating, the lantern glowing beside her. And she knew the decision was near. The next dawn, as the town stirred awake, kindness stood on the same hilltop where she had first spoken to the moon. The lantern throbbed in her hands. The sun was rising, and the moon faintly lingered like a ghost. She understood then what the price would be. If she spoke the truth aloud, she would save her father's memory, but she would lose her shadow, her own innocence, forever. If she kept silent, she could live as before, but the debt would remain, and her father's voice would fade into nothing. She took a deep breath. Her heart hammered. The lantern's glow seeped into her skin, waiting. And as the rooster crowed once more, kindness opened her mouth to talk. The days after kindness brought the lantern home stretched like rope pulled too tight. She tried to live normally, helping her mother fold fabric, walking to the market, even laughing once at Daniel's clumsy joke about his dog eating homework. But the lantern never let her forget. It pulsed faintly every night, spilling thin stripes of light through the crack. It was not a steady glow. It beat like a heart. Sometimes slow and weary, sometimes urgent and fast, as if reminding her, time is passing, truth is waiting. Grace avoided it. She cooked, she sewed, she prayed, but she never once touched the lantern again. Kindness noticed how her mother's hands trembled more these days, how her eyes lingered too long on her daughter's face, like she was preparing for something she couldn't say aloud. One evening, Kindness sat on the rooftop again, lantern balanced in her lap. She whispered into the crack. "Father, what happens if I stay silent?" The voice came back, weak but clear. "Then I fade. And so does everything I ever was." Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why the burden had to be hers. But then she remembered the moon's final words, "Be gentle, but be firm." She thought of the town, of the whispers, of the unasked questions, of the way everyone pretended not to notice the holes in their lives. What if her father wasn't the only one? What if the stolen light was more than him? What if it was every truth swallowed by silence? The lantern pulsed harder. And Kindness realized silence wasn't neutral. Silence was a choice. The next night, the shadows returned. Not the soft whispers of the grove, these were darker, heavier, crowding her room as she tried to sleep. They circled the bed, voices overlapping. Keep it hidden. Truth breaks homes. Better a lie that comforts than a truth that wounds. She clutched the lantern to her chest. The crack flared, spilling light across the room. The shadows recoiled, hissing. But one stepped forward, braver than the rest. Its shape shifted until it looked exactly like her, same face, same hair, same tired eyes. Why ruin your life for a man who left, it said. He didn't leave, Kindness whispered back. He was taken. The shadow smirked. And yet you're the one left carrying him. Do you think the town cares? Do you think they'll thank you for the weight you bring? No. They'll fear you. They'll say you're cursed. They'll treat you like an outsider. Just like they did him. Tears pricked her eyes. The shadow's voice was cruel, but it was also frighteningly close to her own thoughts. The lantern pulsed again. The shadow's face cracked like glass under heat. With a scream, it did not stretch across the dirt like the others. The sun shone bright, but she cast no shadow. The price had been paid. The sun climbed higher, spreading warmth across the rooftops. The crowd at the hilltop slowly dispersed, whispering, some glancing back at Kindness as though unsure whether to bow or to fear. Children tugged on their mother's clothes, asking questions their parents could not answer. Men shook their heads, muttering prayers. But kindness stood still, her face calm, her heart loud. She glanced at her feet again. The sun poured light, but where everyone else cast long morning shadows, she had none. Her hands trembled. The price of truth had been written on her body. She had lost what every person carries without thinking, a reflection, a proof of presence, the silent twin of the soul. Grace climbed the hill slowly, her dress dragging on the dust, her face pale as chalk. When she reached her daughter, she didn't speak at first. She simply looked at her. A mother staring at both a miracle and a wound. Finally, Grace whispered, "You gave him back to me. Even if it was only for a moment, you gave him back." Kindness's throat tightened. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I gave him back, but I lost something too." Grace cupped her daughter's face, her hands warm, her eyes fierce. "Shadows are for those who still hide from the sun. My child, you no longer need one." The words wrapped around Kindness like a blanket. For the first time since the lantern had appeared, she allowed herself to smile through her tears. The crowd below was still murmuring. Some feared her, yes, but others, especially the young, looked at her with awe, with something like hope. Daniel raised his hand in a small wave, his face pale but proud. Kindness understood then that her story was no longer hers alone. By speaking the truth, she had changed not just her own family, but her entire town. No one could pretend anymore that silence was safer than honesty. The light she carried had spilled into them, too. And though she had no shadow, she realized she was not less, she was more. She was a reminder. A living story. As the sun rose fully, Kindness turned her face upward, whispering one last time to the sky. "I spoke to the moon. I carried the truth. And I am still here." The breeze swept across the hilltop, gentle, almost like a hand brushing her shoulder in quiet approval. The story of Kindness, the girl who spoke to the moon, would be told for years to come. Some would tell it as a warning. Some as a miracle. But all would remember that she was the one who chose courage over silence, truth over comfort, love over fear. And though she walked without a shadow, she was never again unseen. Moral of the story. Sparkle's truth has a price, but silence costs even more. Sometimes the heaviest burden is the one we never name. Like Kindness, we all face the choice between comfort and courage. And while courage may leave us marked, it also sets us free.